Mank is fucking great, here's why. It's a complex study of the transitioning period that occurred in Hollywood and the state of California in the 1930s. It's also an in-depth character study of the real-life Hollywood screenwriter Herman J. Mankiewicz, who co-wrote the screenplay for Citizen Kane, one of the most influential films ever made that completely redefined the fundamentals of filmmaking. At the time of writing and recording this, I've kept clear of other YouTube reviews or analysis videos. I wanted to make this video as clear-headed as possible. For honesty's sake, I'll tell you what small piece of information I did glimpse on social media. So before watching the film, I saw this meme joking about how inaccessible Mank was to average audiences. That's literally all it was. Seeing this made me more excited to watch it, because films that are more challenging for the viewer often contain very sophisticated ideas that you have to spend a little bit more time thinking on to fully grasp. They're a little harder to crack, but when you finally do, it's very satisfying. After seeing the film myself, I understood why it had been described as inaccessible. Going into this film without knowing what Citizen Kane was or the history behind it would be the same as going into Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and not knowing anything about the Manson family. The more you know about the period and the state of Hollywood and California during that time, the more you'll get out of the story. Look up Citizen Kane, look up Orson Welles, look up William Randolph Hearst and MGM maybe. It won't take you that long. The Great Depression also plays a key role in the film. You know what that is, right? There's an important election in it as well. I knew nothing about that, but I wasn't thrown off. There isn't too much you need to know, just a few facts. Your mind can probably fill in the blanks as you watch the film. However, it is still a little bit vague as to what it's all about, so I'm going to go in depth on what I think are the main ideas of the film. The initial and obvious theme is the great disservice done to Herman J. Mankiewicz at the hands of multiple overbearing forces in the film's narrative. Orson Welles is the one who is eternally remembered as the pioneer of cinema, who utterly revolutionised the way films were made when he produced the film Citizen Kane. He is still a household name because of that film. The genius boy wonder who made the best film ever made when he was only 24. That's the narrative we all know and have grown very used to. This film presents us with an alternative narrative that provokes thought and intrigue and drives us to ponder the truth of Citizen Kane's actual artistic genesis. The core theme of the entire film is more fluid than concrete. It's essentially about the forgotten contributors to the integral and fundamental aspects of the evolution of Hollywood. The clearest and most obvious demonstration of this theme is within the main concept of the film, bringing to light Mank's story, showing his side of the development of Citizen Kane, the side that's been criminally ignored and understated for all these years. This film is heavily putting forward the idea that the success and ingenuity of Citizen Kane was much more chiefly down to Herman J. Mankiewicz's contribution than history implies. However, this theme of disregarded contributors stretches much further beyond Mank. This film is directed by renowned auteur filmmaker David Fincher, director of many very popular classics stretching back to the late 90s. One of Fincher's recurrent themes throughout his body of work is the criticism/deconstruction of masculinity. There are many examples, but I'm only going to refer to my favourite film of his, The Social Network, when comparing Fincher's past work to Mank. In The Social Network, Fincher depicts a resentful and misogynistic fraternity mentality that originates in the university landscape, but then encroaches itself into the adult world of economic corporations, where it continues to persist and thrive.
Ashley, the intern.
Yeah, I know who she is. Are you guys?
Ashley? Me? No. Well, a little bit. Why?
No.
Excuse me, Mark.
Okay,
We were just talking about you.
just that you're doing a really good job.
It's about men remaining in perpetual states of adolescent misogyny. The Hollywood writer's room we see near the start of Mank is strongly reminiscent of the characters from Social Network, but obviously much worse.
Anybody mind if I take off my pants?
That was the 60s. This is the fucking 30s. The sign on the door, contrasted with the buffoon-like behaviour of the characters, is a quick and comedic indicator that the film is poking fun at these childish traits in young adult males. What tops the scene off is the virtually naked woman sitting nonchalantly off to the side, utterly understated and ignored, highlighting the extent of the misogynistic nature of the film industry. You could even go as far to say that the very sidelining of this exploited woman is another example of this theme of disregarding certain aspects of history. The woman herself doesn't even care. She's used to this. This is normal for her. Normal for everyone in the scene, which is why no one acknowledges it until Mank says,
"What I wouldn't give to see that in a tight sweater."
My interpretation of this line is that Mank is the only one who is remotely aware of the ridiculousness of this situation. A redeeming quality of Mank's throughout the entire film is that he treats women equally to men and respects them for their intelligence. He himself is intelligent and aware enough to see how fucking stupid this discriminatory mentality is.
It's complicated.
Over my head?
Over mine.
The very presence of women plays a key role in the film as well. Whilst making this film set in this grossly sexist era, Fincher took this opportunity to subtly empower women. Through the stylization of this film, Fincher is emulating the style of the old films of the 1930s. However, where this film differs from those from the 30s is it paints a much more honest picture of Hollywood and California. Those old films were utterly conservative and traditional, and would only depict an idealistic side of reality. With this film, there's swearing, vulgarity, blatant misogyny. Even Mankiewicz throwing up would have been controversial in the 30s. The women of those films were for the most part consigned to the submissive, vulnerable, damsel in distress roles. They could only embody extreme effeminate characters that were utterly dependent on men. In Mank, they're depicted equally. They're intelligent, assertive, witty, and formidable. It should be noted that every main female character in the film serves as a strong positive influence in Mank's life. His wife Sarah remains sturdily loyal towards him throughout the whole runtime of the film, displaying great patience in his direction through all his alcoholic blunders. In the writing segments of the film, Mank's nurse Rita becomes crucial in the completion of the first draft of Citizen Kane, spurring him on and reinforcing his self-esteem with regards to his writing capabilities, acting as a sympathetic, positive reinforcer, which overall helps Mank complete the rough draft to this legendary film.
This is Mrs. Alexander. She types 100 perfect words a minute and takes dictation like a clairvoyant.
Mank had a limited amount of time to complete the script, and this film is suggesting that he wouldn't have achieved what he did without the help of Rita. Whilst I can't testify to the accuracy of this proposition, it's a valid idea nonetheless in a broader sense. Just as the case with Herman J. Mankiewicz, the feminine contributions to the evolution of Hollywood is also something that has been criminally swept under the rug and forgotten. If we look at the three main female characters of the film, Rita, Sarah, Marion, nurse, wife, femme fatale, they all embody the type of societal roles that were the only ones available to them in that period of time. They could only contribute so much in that masculine-dominated landscape, but what they did contribute was vital regardless and shouldn't be taken for granted. In the scene when Mank has completed the script, he raises a glass to support devices as he looks at Rita but gestures to the bed. Rita echoes this line and then also gestures to the bed, where we see the literal support devices.
To support devices.
Support devices.
The film lingers on that shot for just long enough to reinforce the point that these devices are receiving more credit for Mank's achievement than the women of the film themselves. Rita even echoes the phrase in a dry manner.
Support devices.
Emphasising how ludicrous yet expected this is. In an earlier scene, we learn that Fraulein, the second nurse accompanying Mank at the ranch, has been allowing Mank to drink despite Orson Welles' attempts to remove that vessel from Mank until he'd finished the script. We learn that Mankiewicz financed the relocation of Fraulein and her entire German village to America, saving the lives of over 100 people. We also learn that he wrote a script about the Nazis which no Hollywood producer dare make. Joseph Goebbels, the minister of Nazi propaganda, won't allow Mank's films to be shown in Germany. Both Rita and we as the audience gain a newfound respect and admiration for Herman after we learn this. Fraulein then states that he is a grown man, a good man, and he should be allowed to drink if he wants to. We are more empathetic towards Mank from this point onwards, and so is Rita. Where the women of the film sympathise and respect Herman, the men act as far more domineering and forceful figures in his life. In complete contrast to Fraulein's philosophy, Orson Welles pens Mank up in this isolated ranch and denies him access to alcohol, only allowing him a bottle here and there if he makes a good amount of progress on the script. As bad as Mank's alcoholism is, this can be seen as kind of fucked up. Whilst Rita and Fraulein act as more delicate and sympathetic motivators, Orson Welles is utterly hands-on with Mank. As extreme as this may seem, however, it does prove to work. Near the end of the film, where Herman finally sees Orson in person, we see how aggressive Orson can be. He goes on a brief rant about how he's responsible for Mank writing the best thing he's ever written, how this would not have been possible if Orson hadn't removed Mank from the rest of the world and regulated his alcohol intake.
Put aside gratitude, Mank. That you've done your best work was no accident. I removed any distraction, eliminated every excuse. Your family, your cronies, liquor.
Despite how aggressive Orson Welles is being, he's right. For as much as we can admire Mank, he is also quite a fuck-up at times. He's talented but messy, witty yet careless, brilliant but lazy.
Brilliant but lazy.
The harsh rehabilitation that Orson imposed on Mank did play its part, but so did Rita and Fraulein. It was a balance of both masculine and feminine, heavy-handed and sympathetic. The film is not denying Orson's own heavy contribution towards Citizen Kane. It's only emphasising the truth that he was far from the only one responsible for the film's completion. Citizen Kane and Orson Welles are so closely linked in association together. We see the whole thing as this monumental one-man show. Writers being disregarded and sidelined is a phenomenon that still occurs to this day. The directors are always at the forefront of the praise and notoriety of the film. Directors are often highly assertive and domineering. In a lot of ways they have to be, so they can get a film made. Writers are usually much more understated and a little more submissive. In the landscape of Hollywood, they are often walked all over by the producers and directors, and struggle to voice their own opinions and wishes or fight for their own interests and preferences. It's for these very reasons that Herman J. Mankiewicz has been forgotten. This film is highlighting how domineering directors and producers can be, in the direction of the more understated and submissive figures in Hollywood. We can see parallels in the oppression of the writer at the hands of the director and the oppression of the feminine at the hands of the masculine. We also see the same power dynamic with regards to the wealthy tycoon archetype and, well, the rest of the world. The character William Randolph Hearst seems to be at the paramount of this hierarchy. His gargantuan wealth and influence enable him to puppeteer every system of government and industry. He controls the majority of the top newspaper companies.
And you won't go to the press because in California that means Hearst.
Essentially owns Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer through his lackey L.B. Mayer. He even has a say on who sits on President Roosevelt's cabinet.
I heard Pops on the phone helping to pick the president's cabinet like casting a movie.
One of my favourite scenes of the film is the first dinner party we see at Hearst's mansion. It's a dialogue-heavy sequence and a lot of different topics are brought up. The scene flirts with so many ideas at such a high frequency. The first topic of conversation is about Hitler, who at this point in time was still on the rise to power. Not everyone took him seriously yet, and we see that demonstrated in this scene.
This Hitler sounds like an utter drip. Shouldn't the United States do something, Mr. Tugwell?
We are weighing all options.
Can't last. Who in the world takes a lunatic like that seriously?
Well, the last time I looked, 40 million Germans.
Mank and Marion are the only people in the room with the wisdom to recognise that Hitler is not someone to be dismissed so lightly, especially with regards to how many people in Germany he's won over already. This is a testament to the foresight of the artistic/creative mentality that Mank embodies.
Those people adore him. I'm probably talking nonsense.
You're the first tonight that isn't.
I'll be returning to this point on the mentioning of Hitler a little later on. The conversation then abruptly moves to Upton Sinclair, communism and socialism. An ironic parallel is drawn between communism and a depression-stricken American film industry.
There's a world of difference between communism and socialism.
They both want something for nothing.
Like a workforce for free?
Half, and only in the interim.
I am asking everyone in the MGM family to take a painful step. I am asking to roll back salaries.
This film spends a lot of time critiquing the vast power and influence that these Hollywood elites have on politics and general world events. The film industry controls the messages that are instilled into the general population. They can emotionally manipulate the masses into supporting their political agendas. Hearst controls the majority of the news, therefore the majority of the information that is fed to the people. This is how they manipulate the Californian election later on in the film.
Helping to pick the president's cabinet like casting a movie. They can stop a guy like Sinclair. Couldn't you, Pops? Pardon. I don't know what I'm saying.
In the scene that plays directly after this, we follow Mank and Marion across the grounds of Hearst's enormous estate, and we see many visual references to the aesthetic style of Citizen Kane and the Xanadu mansion in that film. Charles Foster Kane is the main character of Citizen Kane, who was portrayed by Orson Welles. The life and story of the Charles Foster Kane character is largely based on the life of the real William Randolph Hearst. Hence the film acts as a semi-critique/expose on Mr. Hearst. We also learn more about Upton Sinclair, that he criticised Hearst in a book he wrote, similar to how Herman and Orson would later go on to do when they'd make Citizen Kane.
I used to could quote it word for word. I saw our richest newspaper publisher keep his movie mistress in a private city of palaces and cathedrals, furnished with shiploads of junk imported from Europe and surrounded by vast acres reserved for use by zebras and giraffes.
On many occasions, I'd say this film draws parallels between Orson Welles and Upton Sinclair, whilst at the same time highlights similar parallels between Orson Welles and William Randolph Hearst. Both Orson and Sinclair were provocative in their respective positions, both aimed to challenge societal norms and break new ground with regards to political/social commentary.
Speaking of socialists, how about Upton Sinclair's new book? He wants to turn private enterprise over to the state of California.
There's one we won't be optioning, eh, Irving?
Both Orson and Hearst were iconic, influential figures of their times, and both became domineering forces as a result of which. They both also use Mank for his talents and then later discard him, only in slightly different ways. Orson uses him for his artistic ingenuity to write the screenplay for Citizen Kane. Hearst just uses him because he makes for a captivating party guest. Marion Davies is a character who is also used in this similar sort of way. First of all, there's the obvious example of the matter of her being a famous actress in a sexist 1930s Hollywood, consigned to extreme effeminate roles in films that are tailored towards the male perception of the ideal woman. Attractive, vulnerable, innocent, simple-minded, and utterly dependent on an external masculine figure. This theme is reinforced when Mank references Dulcinea, when he and Marion are discussing potential movie roles that she could play. Dulcinea is a character from the book Don Quixote, a work of Western literature from the early 1600s. While I've not read the book myself, from what I do know about the story and premise, it's a book that satirises chivalry, among many other things. Putting it briefly, the book revolves around the adventures of Don Quixote, who's read so many chivalric tales in literature that he goes mad and decides to become a knight. The character Dulcinea, you might say, is the female love interest of the book. She's essentially a figment of Quixote's imagination, his mind's eye of what an ideal proper lady should be/act like. Mank claims that Marion would be a good fit for the role of Dulcinea.
Could you see me playing Elizabeth Barrett Browning or Marie Antoinette?
I see you more as Dulcinea.
Comparing Marion to Dulcinea in this manner is this film's way of accentuating the oppressive nature of Marion's position in Hollywood. Like Dulcinea, she can only be what men want her to be. Cinema in those days was predominantly catering to the masculine demographic. The scene that illustrates this point the best is the corridor sequence at MGM Studios.
$1 million a year we spend on stories we never even film. Why not? I'll tell you. They don't make me cry. What makes me cry? Emotion. Where do I feel emotion? Here, here, and here.
I'd go as far to say that Mank mentioning Dulcinea in this scene demonstrates that he is aware of this absurd dynamic. Hearst essentially dictates her career. He can get her any movie role he or she wishes.
Could you see me playing Elizabeth Barrett Browning or Marie Antoinette? Irving's bought them both. You know, because of Pops.
Later on in the film, she's denied the role of Marie Antoinette because her films don't make enough money anymore and Hearst does nothing to help her. Like Mank, she's used by the Hollywood elites for her skills and entertainment value and then later discarded when she's no longer economically viable. Where parallels were drawn between Orson and Hearst, similar parallels are also drawn between Mankiewicz and Marion. The way in which Hollywood treated writers is very similar to the way in which it treated actresses, and this film reaffirms that similarity throughout multiple points in the narrative. Writers and actresses don't possess the same level of power and influence that these directors and producers do. Only by manifesting an extreme masculine persona do you dominate in this industry. I'd say it's this very mutual oppression that causes Mank and Marion to bond to the extent that they do. Mank is treated like shit all throughout the film by the overly assertive producers and wealthy business owners. When we're first introduced to Louis B. Mayer, the biggest arsehole of the entire film, he can't recall who Mank is.
Who? Herman Mankiewicz.
Do I know him?
He wrote one of our Lon Chaney's.
As soon as Mank walks away, he's already forgotten who he is again.
Who was that again?
Just a writer.
Another reflection of how Hollywood swiftly forgot about Mankiewicz's integral contribution to the industry's progression. Writers are so easily obscured,
Just a writer.
and like many others, Mayer does not recognise nor appreciate Mank's value as a writer/artist. In the moment that immediately follows, Mank meets Marion for the first time. Marion is actually the one who calls out his name and addresses him first.
Movie.
I know you. We met at John Gilbert's birthday. You're Herman Mankiewicz.
She recognises his value immediately and addresses him with the level of respect that he deserves, and he does the same in return.
And I remember you, Miss Davies.
You're stronger than you look.
And from what I understand, you're smarter.
Another example of the women in Mank's life having positive influences and the men having negative influences. As much as this film reinforces the integral role that Mank/the writers of Hollywood played in the construction of Citizen Kane/the evolution of cinema, it also depicts the flip side of that idea, Mank's negative contribution. A large subplot of the film is the 1934 Californian election between Democrat Upton Sinclair and Republican Frank F. Merriam. Sinclair is a former socialist turned Democrat who is firmly on the side of the working class and aspires to reduce unemployment in California. Sinclair is also known for his campaigns against private enterprises.
How about Upton Sinclair's new book? He wants to turn private enterprise over to the state of California.
And his passing of federal laws to ban oil monopolies.
Upton Sinclair is Thomas Jefferson?
No, you're right, W.R. Jefferson never got federal laws passed to ban oil monopolies or railroad trusts.
He's a man of the people and a giant threat to the rich elites of Hollywood. He has dirt on L.B. Mayer and criticised William Randolph Hearst in a book he wrote. It's for these multiple reasons that when the election starts, MGM begins an anti-Sinclair fund, to which Mank does not contribute to. Not knowingly, at least. In this scene with Irving Thalberg, we learn about this campaign as Thalberg pressures Mank to pitch in. It's only until the end of this scene does Mankiewicz deliver this line that would change the landscape of cinema and politics forever.
You can make the world swear King Kong is 10 stories tall and Mary Pickford a virgin at 40. Yet you can't convince starving voters that a turncoat socialist is a menace to everything Californians hold dear? You're barely trying.
This moment is the genesis of that new form of political propaganda used by Hollywood in collusion with the wealthy upper-class elites. The filthy practice of using the medium of film for these perverted means of pushing political agendas. This nasty movement that further entangled Hollywood within the world of politics. It started here, and Mank was the founder of this philosophy. And this is his negative contribution to cinema. Obviously, this isn't something I can testify to the historical accuracy of, but that isn't really the point. It's not supposed to be a factual biography, more so a provocative interpretation of what might have been.
You cannot capture a man's entire life in 2 hours. All you can hope is to leave the impression of one. Nobody.
In this film, Mank represents the creative minds of Hollywood. With this narrative beat, the film is toying with the idea of the artist's role in the birth of this form of propaganda. Such a cunning yet effective practice may very well have come from the mind of an ingenious thinker such as Herman J. Mankiewicz. The same mind that forever redefined the way in which stories were told in film may very well have also set this new precedent for how the media manipulates the public through cinematic language.
Well, it's enough to persuade me that a writer is more of a menace to an unsuspecting public than a party hack.
This film is all about the most significant turning point in Hollywood history. The obvious and most famous example is the revolutionary storytelling of Citizen Kane, but the more cunning and sinister example is the rise of politically driven storytelling. The multiple mentions of Hitler and his influence over Germany is done to contrast Nazi propaganda with the anti-Sinclair campaign, emphasizing the tyrannical nature of this form of mass manipulation. The negative campaigning against Upton Sinclair, unfortunately, unfortunately causes him to lose the election. The scene of the election night party is where we get this brilliant montage, displaying Herman's wariness to the whole situation. Close-ups of devilish laughter from the domineering high society, indulgent amounts of champagne gushing out of bottles, bright flashing lights illustrating the fake glossy sheen of 30s Hollywood. MGM have raped Mank of his avant-garde ideals and used it to rig this election. This is yet another example of the artist being used for their intellect like a pawn. This theme is solidified by the organ grinder's monkey parable delivered by William Randolph Hearst in this scene near the end of the film.
Are you familiar with the parable of the organ grinder's monkey? He thinks, what a powerful fellow I must be. Look how patiently everyone waits just to watch me dance. And wherever I go, he thinks, this music box must follow, and with it this poor downtrodden man. And if I chose not to dance, this sorry street peddler would starve. And every time I do decide to dance, every time, he must play, whether he wishes to or not. You've had a bit too much to drink, Herman.
This is the moment where Mankiewicz realises who his puppet masters are, the same masters as everyone else in Hollywood, how little power he has in his position. It's this very moment where he is inspired to go after William Randolph Hearst and the tycoon archetype in the screenplay for Citizen Kane.
Mank, if I may be so bold, why Hearst? John, are you familiar with the parable of the organ grinder's monkey?
The film isn't demonising masculinity, more so it's highlighting the tyrannical degree to which it can manifest in Hollywood, utterly dominating the industry and forming an environment in which an oppressive mentality may thrive. It's making fun of the extreme sexism that was commonplace in the 1930s. It's a criticism of the unbalanced power dynamic between the director and the writer, between the producer and the artist, between the masculine and the feminine. I wouldn't say it's in any way casting a bad light on Orson Welles, nor implying that all the genius behind Citizen Kane was down to Mankiewicz. It's merely showing that it wasn't down to the brilliance of a single man, more so the contributions of many different people and variables. Mank completed the screenplay on time with the aid of both firm masculine forces and softer, more sympathetic feminine forces, whereas the rest of Hollywood was grossly unbalanced, only allowing for an extreme masculine mentality within the workplace. It's such a calmer environment for Mank when he's left alone with Rita and Fraulein. No hot-headed directors or producers talking down to him or barking commands his way. It's a study of that key transitioning period of 1930s Hollywood. In regards to silent films to talkies, the reinvention of the cinematic structure at the hands of Citizen Kane, and the degree to which the industry utilised the medium of film to push political agendas and manipulate world events. It's about the forgotten figures of Hollywood who are integral to its survival and evolution, both positive and negative contributions. The film draws to a close once it's fully fleshed out Herman J. Mankiewicz's point of view of the changing Hollywood scene and the conception of the Citizen Kane story. We wholeheartedly understand Mank's motivations behind going after William Randolph Hearst and the rest of the Hollywood elites when writing that innovative screenplay. We're given a bittersweet ending of Herman sharing the credit for the script with Orson Welles, along with the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay that they'd also share. We hear an audio recording from 1942 with Orson Welles being asked about the controversy, where he expresses contempt towards Mank's half of the award.
Mank, you can kiss my hat.
We then end on an interview with Mank exclaiming how the screenplay was written in the absence of Orson Welles. When asked why Orson shares credit, we get this final line from Mank.
How come he shares credit?
Well, that, my friend, is the magic of the movies.
This reaffirms the overarching themes of the domineering nature of Hollywood, this extreme masculine-oriented landscape that is one of the chief reasons Orson Welles was able to strong-arm Mank in the manner that he did. The only other film I've seen of Orson Welles is A Touch of Evil, which Mankiewicz did not write. While it's a quality film that's visually complex and well-directed, the narrative intricacy is nowhere close to the level at which Citizen Kane's narrative structure resided on. I myself can easily believe that the fundamental orchestration of Kane's avant-garde non-linear structure and thematic storytelling was predominantly down to Herman J. Mankiewicz's contribution. But despite how crucial and valuable Mank was to this landmark of cinema and the history of Hollywood, he was hastily and negligently obscured in time. He was that core piece everyone failed to notice, to recognise, to appreciate. He was Rosebud.
Well, that's why I'm here. On behalf of the secondary characters.